you think that people are going to think you're wonderful.
Right. That's right.
And because you work hard and you do all the right things, and you have to step back at a certain point and realize that you have to sell yourself. Well, I did sell myself, and I wound up getting the job, but that was a very shocking, hard lesson for me.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Women's Career Day, part of the Worth Quoting series sponsored by Open Campus Television at Florida Community College at Jacksonville. This is Making It to the Top. I'm Kelly Williams, your host for this special program, Factors for Success. Today we have an opportunity to meet a couple of Jacksonville executives who also happen to be women. Both were finalists for the Florida Times Union's 1992 EVE Award, an award that recognizes outstanding women in our community. We hope to learn through these women's personal stories some things that might help us in our own climb up the corporate, educational, or public service ladder. Our guests are Virginia Borrock, Executive Director of Gateway Community Services, Inc. Virginia was instrumental in helping to develop a way to care for and rehabilitate cocaine-addicted pregnant women in Jacksonville and their newborns. Welcome, Virginia.
Thank you.
Also with us today is Julie Woodruff, Vice President of the Foundation for Healthcare at Baptist Medical Center. She also developed and administered a $15 million capital campaign, which I understand is now at $15.5 million. $16.5 million for the new Children's Hospital at the medical center. And welcome to you, Julie. Okay, let's talk about how you got to where you are. I think that a lot of women are concerned about, who also want to climb these ladders of success. They want to know, okay, how do I get on the right track? How did the two of you get on the right track?
Well, if you mean by the right track, finding the right job that's a good fit, that fits you and you fit the job, I think that the person in question, me, you, us, have to be open to whatever comes along and opportunities, no matter how unrelated they might seem. The thing that led me to my job was a community volunteer position a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and I did it a little bit reluctantly because it took a lot of time, but it gave me a preparation for what I'm doing now that I would not have had, and it put me in a position to be open to something I never would have dreamed of.
How about you, Virginia?
Well, I started out in the traditional thing that women are supposed to do. I was a home economics major in college. My first jobs were in New York City with pattern companies and sewing machine companies and things of that sort. When I married and had children and stayed home, I became a community volunteer.
Yes.
And volunteerism led me into the field of alcohol and drug rehabilitation, and that's how I wound up where I am today.
Julie, earlier you were talking about how sometimes you, through just being nice to people and volunteering, as you mentioned earlier with your first job, you can end up meeting people, and through those people you end up getting that first job that leads to the job that you eventually get. Can you talk a little bit about how sometimes happenstance sort of plays a role in all of this?
Well, the volunteer arena is a very important arena, and it is open virtually to every single person in the universe. And it's particularly open to Americans because that's such a distinct part of our American culture. In fact, there's no other culture or country on earth that has such a strong volunteer segment that does such gargantuan things. Alexis de Tocqueville talks about that in some of his essays that he wrote when he visited America 150 years ago. But that is an arena where we can open ourselves up, we can meet people, we can do all kinds of different things, because when you volunteer, you ought to get to do what you like to do and what you enjoy doing and what you're good at. Because if you're volunteering, you shouldn't have to do something you're not good at and don't want to do. Therefore, you get some experience in something that you're good at, you meet people in the same milieu, and it does often lead to things.
How about you, Virginia?
Well, volunteerism was very important in what happened to me, but I became involved in volunteering primarily when my children started in school.
So did I.
And, in New York we didn't have PTAs, we had parents' associations. It happened to be in the mid-'60s when we had all of those horrendous strikes between the teachers' union and the school system. And I got involved in keeping a neighborhood school open that the system wanted to close. And I found I had very good negotiating skills, I guess part of being a parent, of working through various systems and not making people angry, making everybody feel like they had a part in the solution. And that led me into being a respected volunteer in my area. And then one concern led to another, and it just so happened that the first Phoenix House, which is a very large international drug rehabilitation program, opened in my neighborhood, or a few blocks from where I lived. And I heard somebody speak at a community meeting, and that's how I wound up in the field of
Virginia,
alcohol
you're
and
still
drug
doing.
addiction.
You're still doing today exactly what you did as a volunteer.
Absolutely. I am still doing today what I started out doing as a volunteer. I'm getting paid for it now.
I am too. I'm still raising money.
Right, and that's right. You mentioned that. Julie mentioned how important it is to do something that you like to do, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with your success. And clearly you wouldn't be involved in the kind of work you're involved in if you didn't like it. And I guess you're also not afraid of controversy either. I mean, I would imagine with you fighting for having the school open in your neighborhood, that had to put you in sort of a controversial position.
Yes, in a way, although I think women are very good at conflict. I have 3 children who are each about 2.5 years apart, and a husband who is very articulate and can very often nail me to the wall on points. And we get into a lot of struggles in our discussions on things. So I have negotiated that minefield of kids, husband, family.
It's great training
for so many years.
Yeah, a lot of
and I think women do this very well.
Right.
And I think that's something that may not be appreciated about us when we get into business.
That's true. I don't think a lot of women really realize how many skills they can build.
That's right, they don't. And they don't understand that they could put on a resume an awful lot of volunteer work and this negotiation that you talked about. And nobody's given them credit heretofore necessarily for being able to feed 700 people spaghetti, for the PTA, but that's a real chore.
And to fight for their kids' rights at PTA meetings, to get up and speak in front of crowds, that kind of thing. I don't think they really realize it. Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit about your personal stories, how all of these things work together for you to put you on the right track and then to kind of keep you there, and how you weren't afraid of change.
Well, we may have been afraid of change.
How you learned not to be afraid of change, but how you learned to let it work for you instead of against you. Why don't you, let's start with you, Julie.
Okay. I started out as a volunteer in the PTA in the school system, just like Virginia did. I think many, many women do that. And one thing led to another, and when my children were, starting school, I felt a great need to go back to work, because as much as I love being a mother, and I think I'm a pretty good mother, I am far more than just somebody's mother, and I always will have to do something else, because I'm blessed with boundless energy, or maybe cursed with it, I don't know. And so I did that, and I came to work at Florida Community College, as a matter of fact, where I stayed for about 8 years. But there wasn't enough for me there, and I needed to move on. And I had accepted a position as chairman of the Jacksonville Community Council's philanthropy study. And I did so reluctantly because the JCCI studies take about a year, and it just absorbs an enormous amount of time. But the president of the organization had asked me to do it, and I didn't feel like I could say no, because I did have an interest. I've always raised money for the civic organizations I've been involved in. So I said yes, and I learned so much, met so many people, and much to my surprise and joy, it put me in a position to be able to accept Baptist Medical Center's job offer in the community relations field, which very quickly led to the administration of their capital campaign and eventually to heading up the foundation, which is what I do now.
Okay.
And I can trace all those rather circuitous things all back to volunteer work that prepared me to do this. I like to do it, and I can do it. And they need it.
Okay, that's good. I think that's good. And then from your story, Virginia, we know a little bit already about how you got into sort of the community services field. How did you get to Jacksonville? How did you get to Gateway?
I did the traditional woman thing. I followed my husband here.
So did I.
I kind of left New York City kicking and screaming. I had a job that I loved. I was very embroiled in my area politics, which I loved, and I was always organizing all kinds of community things, whether it was the Parents Association or block associations or whatever, Easter egg hunts, all kinds of things. I was just very, very involved in my neighborhood activities. And my husband called me one day and said, "We're moving to Jacksonville, Florida." And I kind of said, "Where is that?" And I was not very happy when I first came to Jacksonville. It was the first year of school integration. I felt like I had kind of been, ripped out of my activities. I moved into a neighborhood in the south side of town. It was the year that the schools were integrated. And of course, I had come from very integrated neighborhood schools. And one of the first people that approached me from my new neighborhood told me that my neighbors across the street were Jewish. My husband happens to be Jewish.
Well, they hadn't heard that yet, huh?
And that they didn't know how I felt about integration, but they were against it. And I said, "Uh-oh, what have I walked into?"
But those stories, what have I walked into, you learn from those stories and those stories end up being something that you can adapt to other situations in your career.
That's right.
Think about that, if you will, for a moment, about some of those things that you'd like to forget about, those stories that you tell people who are very dear to you, perhaps a protege, someone who can really learn from that. Think about a really tough situation that you've been placed in even your current position, that maybe through an experience such as that, you were able to get out of it. It may be a lot easier than you were probably initially with the neighbors across the street. But if you will, try to share with our audience a story like that of a difficult time, perhaps with a coworker or someone who reported to you, or perhaps even a boss, and how you dealt with that situation, and if you dealt with it in a way that you wish you had not, what you learned from the situation.
There's a common thread in all difficult situations. And for me, personally, and I pound this into my children, I think it's courtesy. I really do think that good manners get you across the thinnest ice, whether you are getting a divorce or working with a horrible person or working with a number of different people. I really think that if you continue to treat them respectfully, and hopefully they will too, and they don't always, but if you cannot back down from what you know to be the right thing. Somebody the other day said, it's not always easy. Doing the right thing is not always easy, but it's always right. Mm-hmm. And I think if you need to be sure of how you feel about something, about the rightness for you, and then maintain good manners, but don't back down.
Right.
It's hard to make a generalization, but I think I would make that generalization.
And if you could sell that to people getting a divorce, you and I would both be rich.
Well, I happen to have been divorced, and my husband and I did that, and we are still good friends, and we continue to be good parents, and even though we are divorced.
And I'm sure that helps you out your
It certainly
career
did.
as well.
Well, yes, personally and professionally.
Right.
While you were talking, I happened to think of another thing that happens to women, and it relates to the boss and the power of a board and so on. I was a planner and evaluator at what used to be a state-funded organization called the Mental Health Board, and the executive director retired, who was an older gentleman. And I naturally, you know, I had been the workhorse of the organization, and I naturally assumed that everybody would look at me and say, well, Virginia, you know, should be the boss. And I was shocked to find out that everybody didn't look at me and think that Virginia should be the boss, that they started recruiting from, you know, all over the state, you know, people to come in and be executive director. What I learned from that experience was that women are not very good at selling themselves. They're not terribly good at competition. At least I was not. And I had to force myself to go sit down with board members and say, look, I have done this, this, and this. I want this job. Whereas it's kind of like you don't vote for yourself in a school election. I mean, it's just...
But you
know,
should. If you don't, you lose.
I know, it's the same, but that's kind of the mentality, I think, that a lot of young women, you know, particularly of my generation, came through life with, and you think that people are going to think you're wonderful.
Right. That's right.
And because you work hard and you do all the right things, and you have to step back at a certain point and realize that you have to sell yourself. Well, I did sell myself, and I wound up getting the job, but that was a very shocking, hard lesson for me.
Finding that delicate balance is difficult because you don't want to oversell yourself and come across as being too cocky, and at the same time you don't want to undersell yourself.
That's right.
Was it difficult for the two of you to sort of find that right balance?
Yes.
Tell me.
I practically interrupted
Well,
you.
you tell me a story. I want to know a story, because you're not sharing with me a story.
I don't know that I can think of a specific story, but I know exactly what you're talking about the balance, and you walk it all the time, because when you're in an enormous organization with 3,000 employees, there's some above you and there's some under you, and there's board members and there's lots of senior administrative staff, and you do want them to know you can do the job and that you deserve it and that you can do it better than anybody else. But if you're a newcomer, you don't have a track record with them, and so it's a very hard balance to find sometimes.
Have you ever oversold yourself?
Yeah, I think so, because I talk too much. Yeah.
And it is a constant learning process, isn't it? I think that people think that you get to a certain point, you stop, that the learning stops, but it is
never stop.
Yeah, it's an evolving process, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you tell me about some of your recent lessons, or perhaps some of the things that you're working on now that might help you? Some of the things that you say, okay, well, if I could just fine-tune this, then I'd be just where I want to be. What are some of those things?
Well, I'm fairly new in the healthcare profession. This is just my 3rd year in it, so I'm a newcomer to it. I find it a fascinating, wonderful industry, and going to be even more important than it already is, because we have to change the way that we deliver health care in the United States. And so I am very much enjoying learning about that and educating myself in the philanthropy area of fundraising, which is entirely different than any other kind of fundraising. Religion leads the field with more than 50% of the money given, and then education is next, and healthcare is about 4th on the ladder. So we have a hard fight. And I'm learning a lot about that, which gives me, as I learn more and become more competent, I become more confident and sure of myself and sure of my ground as I deal with my colleagues and others around me in the healthcare profession.
Okay. Well, Virginia?
I think that one of the things that keeps me energized about where I am and what I'm doing, I think in a way I have a mission to make people realize that people who have terrible, terrible problems can, with the proper help and support, get out of them and start a new life for themselves. And the thing that the project that you mentioned, even though Gateway is a huge organization and there are a lot of different parts of the program, the project that you mentioned when you introduced me about the women, we have women that come to us that I think society really considers women that don't have a chance, that they would be better off, you know, institutionalized or in jail, or their kids in foster care, or with relatives or whatever. And we have little nucleuses of putting families back together and putting some lives back together. And it's hard work and it takes a lot of effort. But just think, if you had no education, you had been sexually, physically, or emotionally abused as a child and an adult, you had been a prostitute, you had no modeling to know how to take care of a child, and you basically are starting from ground zero as a person in your mid-20s to try to put all of this together. And I am finding that very, very challenging and something that can keep me going for a few more years to try to help make a difference with some of those lives.
And it sounds like both of you really believe in what you're doing, and it sounds also that a great deal of what you do, although your job's not a sales job, but it really is selling.
It is a sales job. Mine is.
Well, you have to get the money to, a lot of my job is political. The city, the city administration decides not to fund detox, or they left it out of the budget.
There you go.
I have to go to city council and make sure that all the pieces are together and that we get it back in. And
that happens to my institution. I always think of the foundation at Baptist Medical Center as passing gear for the medical center, because it couldn't do what it does without the money that I raise on a philanthropic basis. We couldn't continue the services and give the charity care we give, and especially children who aren't covered lots of times.
Yeah, you have to write grants.
Oh,
you have to know where you can seek additional resources. So it's very, very complicated. It can become very political. You need to stay in touch with colleagues over the state and nation so that you can begin to draw on other resources that may come to the fore. So it's a massive juggling act, and then you've got, in my case, I've got this huge staff and all of these facilities to look after, and about 900 clients. So it's trying at times.
Right, I can see that. I'm sure there are younger women in both of your organizations who come to the two of you, and I don't know, in whatever state they might be in that particular day, sometime in tears and feeling exasperated, feeling hopeless sometimes, because I know that being a woman in the executive suite, if you will, or even in the bottom of the organization looking up, sometimes it's difficult because you feel that maybe you're facing challenges that are different from the challenges that men face. What do you tell those women, especially when they're at a point where they are exasperated and maybe they're giving up hope? What do you tell them from your own experience about that might help them in seeing that it really is attainable, that success is something that they too can reach?
I tell them what Winston Churchill said: never, 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 never give up. And it's really hard not to do that if you're feeling down. And I have had periods in my life when I remember one Friday afternoon 4 or 5 years ago, when I just went home and went to bed on a Friday afternoon and cried myself to sleep and didn't get up till Saturday because I felt so low. But and I think you can come back from those points. Fortunately, those don't happen to me very often. Haven't happened to me in a long time. But just to keep going, to not give up, and to, like I said, the very first thing on this program, be open to whatever comes along, no matter how strange you may think it or how unrelated to what you need to do. And getting out maybe and doing something different is healthy and can lead to something else.
Okay, and Virginia, some final words from you on what you'd say to a younger woman looking to you for.
I think education is very important, and I try to urge the women in my organization, not only the women, but everybody, to go back to school.
And keep going.
I went back to college and got a doctorate in public administration when I was married with a whole batch of small children. It's very important because the education helps give you the credibility, again, for the positions that you want to get to. And a lot of our people, and I'm very proud of that, are going to school. They're getting their degrees. They're becoming certified as addiction professionals, which is important for our field. So we try to do a lot of that kind of promoting to help people grow.
Okay, so education then.
It's good for them personally, too.
It sure is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I really hope and I believe that women who are watching will learn a lot from this discussion. And thank you both for being with us. Our guests today have been Julie Woodruff from Baptist Medical Center and Virginia Borrock from Gateway Community Services. Thank you both for being with us. This has been a nice discussion. And let's hope our audience joins us for part 2. Our discussion will be a little bit more personal. We'll talk about how our families play a role in our success. Thank you again.
Thank you.